Just signed in with GitHub, and now I'm looking at a list of notes. And I don't know if you noticed, but the URL changed from /signin to /notes. So this is using routes like we did in the other thing. I click on one of these. It loads over here, and the URL changes again to notes / the ID of a specific note. So we've done all the things necessary to make the route change, and we've also done the necessary things to, if we visit that URL again directly, it does load that specific note. So that was one of the things you saw yesterday in the GitHub example. Like, you could make it change the URL to be what you wanted before you reach the point where it would actually go out and load that API when you visited that URL, right? Or vice versa, actually, because you had to change whether you were doing it in the constructor or somewhere else. So this does all that stuff. It uses those skills. So if this seems kind of overwhelming, that it does all this stuff, and of course you can update these things. This one doesn't have a title, but notice we show untitled there instead of blank, or instead of just not working, because that's what Evernote does, and this is a pretty shameless Evernote clone. Now we have a title. Notice it updates it in the sidebar as you're typing it live. Hey there. This is a list. Check it out. Whoa, bullets. Yeah. Rich text. Y'all. Cool, cool. If I'm looking at an existing one, I can create a new one by hitting the little plus here. I can log out by clicking this. Log back in. Hopefully the API is in a good mood. Yep. I can get rid of a note. This one doesn't look terribly valuable. And notice when I delete, so here I have my URL is, again, the ID of the specific note. I hit delete, and it goes back to /notes. You know, it didn't do that unless I wrote the code to tell it to do that. So other little usability things, I'll kind of harp on this point a little more later. So glancing at this, does this seem sort of overwhelmingly complicated to you? Honest question, I don't know whether it does or not. Okay, so let's break it down. What's the difference between this and thing list? We have a list of things. We can create those things, we can edit those things, and we can delete those things. So one difference is, like, those just had a title. This has a title and a body, right? But the things didn't just have a title, right? They had a title. They had the thing that represented the checkbox, right? A completed field. They had a date time, the due date. So there were 3 fields on those besides the ID. This actually only has 2 fields besides the ID, title and body, and they're both strings. So, you know, really not so terribly different if you want to look at it that way. A lot of apps are kind of just thing list with a different user interface and with some slightly different specifics. Now, in this case, we can use a rich text editor to edit the body. So we have to figure out how to do something like that. Unsurprisingly, there are pre-written components that take some of the hard part out of doing that, but you still have to learn how to use them. But it's not so different from thing list on some level. And when we edited existing things from thing list, we did it in place with content editable, right? Instead of loading it in another form. So that's another difference. Instead of just like editing it by typing right here inside this little box, I open it over here on the right. Not so terribly hard. We have to add another component to represent the form, and then we have to pass the title and the body as props to that new component. But we can do that. If we take the rich text editing out, you have the skills to do most of this stuff. Maybe the routing is a little complicated. Spoiler alert, The way we've done it is actually a little complicated, but it wouldn't have to be quite as complicated as ours is if you didn't want to make it quite as robust. So part of the complication is we've made it so that certain routes require you to already be logged in. So, here's the URL for a specific note. If you're not logged in, you should not be able to view that note, right? So, because it's scoped to my user, just like it would be in thing list. So if you do that, what should that do in a well-written app? You could make it just return an error or show a blank page or something, but that's not what you would do in a real professional app. What should it do if you try to visit? Yeah.
Like redirect you to a page where you log in.
Yeah, redirect you to a page. It's an appropriate thing to do there. Maybe with a message that says, you have to log in first. And ideally, the URL would change when it does that too. Right? So it does some of that stuff. So if we want to see kind of how this works and pretend that we don't have access to the source code sitting right here, how could we get a better understanding of how this thing works? Developer tools. Don't forget they're there, folks. I see this is not a personal criticism, it's just an observation and a hope that you kind of catch on to this. A lot of times when we go and give you help on something, you've reached something that isn't working, and I look at it and you don't even have the developer tools open. Well, for heaven's sake, open the developer tools first. See if there's like a really obvious error message. If it's a React thing and the thing that you're expecting to show up isn't showing up, look in the React dev tools and see if that component is even there. React tools or dev tools are your friend. Let's look at the dev tools for Noteherder. Let's look at React. All right, browser router, like yesterday. Router, blah, blah, blah. Have to go down a little bit to get to our real components. Here's app. What do you think our state's going to look like? What do you think our state's going to look like? Yeah, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot like thing list with notes instead of things, right? So here we have notes. We have a UID just like the other one. And we have a bunch of notes. They have body, ID, title, and a Unix epoch, a timestamp for when they were last updated. Because, watch this, if I update this one, it goes to the top of the list. Why? Because Evernote does that. It shows you the ones you've edited most recently at the top, which I think is a pretty good design. So that's how we do it. If you look at the body, it looks like is HTML. Ooh, that was an interesting one. That was this one, I think. Look at that. There's a little code sample in the middle of it. So state doesn't look like anything we haven't done before. If you ignore the fact that the body contains, it's just a string, but it is HTML. And when we show it on the screen, we actually render the HTML. Okay, so it looks like inside app, we have a div that contains the whole thing. Now switch, didn't use switch yesterday. You did? Okay, you did use switch yesterday with the router. Now, we used a technique called composition to make these private route and public route components to indicate ones that require you to be logged in. But it's really just another route. Inside that route, we have main. Looks like main has some props. The notes, unsurprisingly. Function remove note, save note, sign out. These aren't huge surprises, probably. And if we look, it's highlighting the whole thing still. So route is further subdivided into nav, which you can see from the highlight is just the stuff on the left. All that's in there is the logo, which has an image in it. And that's a link to the home page. It has this user links at the bottom, and that's the logout button. Potentially at some point, I might put in an edit your profile thing there or something, which is why I bothered to make a component called user links. And somewhere we have the this button. Let's inspect that. React side. Okay, yep, link to notes. Okay, pretty simple. That's this nav component. Then we have, hopefully unsurprisingly, notes list. Very much like thing list, right? It has, its only prop is notes itself. Just notes. That's all it needs to know about. It needs to have the list of notes. You don't do anything. We didn't pass any methods down. It doesn't have any state. All it does is loop through the notes and add them to a UL. And then notice each of those is probably, again, unsurprisingly, a note component, just like the thing component that actually renders the individual note. And all it has prop-wise is the individual note. It doesn't have anything else. And then it has a nav link to the individual node. And of course, there's a route for that. It's a linky poo. All right, great. So that's notes list. We have another switch with a route, the path for that route, /notes/ID. Just like the routes that you created yesterday, we have a param in there. And then we have a note form component. And it has a lot more props. We didn't need to pass those props to the list. We didn't need to pass those props to the nav, just to the form, because it's the form that does all the changing, remove note, save note, etc. Now it also has some state. Including this editor value. Now that's something that is specific to the way that we did this WYSIWYG editor. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. It means an editor where you change things to bold, it looks bold. Under the hood, like the code for that stuff is, it may be HTML, it may be some other horrible markup language, or it may be some horrible binary thing. But what you see is what it will look like when someone renders this thing. So instead of just typing the code in like we do in Visual Studio Code, we're seeing it pretty. So a WYSIWYG editor. If we dig a little further, we can see how that works. But, none of this is really beyond your capabilities so far. If you look inside note form, looks like we've got a div. We've got a button. You know how to do buttons. The onClick is just a function that calls something that's going to delete the note, right? And then we've got the actual form here. The form has an input for the title. And it looks like it has an on change. You may notice there's no submit button. This changes as we type it, right? It's changing all the time over here in the sidebar. So we did that with an on change. And then we have this component rich text editor, which we got, someone else wrote this, and then we just had to learn how to use it. Does it feel a little more approachable having broken it down like that? Do you see how it's just an enhanced thing list? It's enhanced quite a bit, but you can go from a list of whatever the heck those were to something else, because a lot of the apps we use every day are really just glorified thing lists. An email client. It's a list of emails instead of things. But it's kind of a lot like this too. In fact, a lot of mail clients look like this. They give you a list of your emails on the left. Maybe they show you the subject instead of the title, and they show you the body instead of the body. Click it, and you get the detailed view over here, right? Very much like this. Not too different from the front end of an email app. So, oh yeah, I'm there. There's just nothing there. We could look at the code for a minute.